to order at 6 o'clock p.m. and ask Clerk Sinski for roll call, please.
Mayor Gunther?
Here.
The clerk's here. Trustee Barker?
Here.
Trustee Barry?
Here.
Oh, yes. Trustee Brady?
Here.
Trustee Guzzo?
Here.
Trustee Little?
Here.
Trustee Nero?
Here.
Manager May?
Here.
Assistant Manager and Finance Director Parker.
Here.
Chief. Would everybody please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everyone to our annual budget workshop. Again, our fiscal year is May 1 through April 30th, so we're in the tail end of one fiscal year and we're going to be beginning another. At this point, is there any open forum request?
No, Mayor, there are none.
And no one's here. I will close open forum. And before I turn it over to Spencer, we're still doing a hybrid board meeting. So tonight, you've got 3 trustees and myself here. And I believe we've got the other 3, we do. The other 3 trustees remotely participating. So I got a full board for this workshop. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over, the draft budget presentation and overview, to Assistant Village Manager Parker.
All right.
Before you start, yes, the police chief, Gunther, is here with us too.
All right, so I just want to start by thanking both the village board as well as all the staff who have been a part of this budget process and who have really put it all together. So I know on the meeting tonight, we've got a lot of the department heads. We've got one here and then others attending remotely, and they'll be able to help answer questions and address things related to their departments as those come up. But also wanted to just express appreciation to staff in the finance department. Cindy's been especially helpful this year in putting everything together for this budget presentation. And so it's, as always, very much a team effort. The manager's done a lot and been able to help us get to where we've got a balanced budget. And the village board, as always, is supportive of good financial practices and has made a lot of very wise decisions in the past that have put us in a good financial position where we are right now. I'll say overall, we're in a better position now than we worried that we might be about a year ago. And so that's really reassuring. So we're in pretty good shape financially and able to start moving forward again and taking on some of our priorities and doing things we'd like to be doing. And so I'm going to talk through financial stability, talk about the resources, talk about our current budget, where it is in terms of being a balanced budget. Then we'll talk through how the budget reflects our priorities and then our plans. And then at the end, we're going to come to some key questions that we're really looking for some feedback on from the board. We've got one method for using each of these 2 things currently in the base budget and the draft budget that's been prepared for you, but we want to talk about it and see if we want to make any shifts from those, specifically on the 2 revenue pieces in terms of our level of how conservative we're being with our cannabis tax projections, as well as what we want to do with our water rate increases. So we'll cover those in detail once we've got kind of the bigger picture of the budget overall. So in terms of our resources, the first thing I want to at least mention, this is something that in the past both Trustee Addington and Trustee Barry had requested we put together just to remind the board and the residents and everyone that our departments are doing a good job in terms of trying to hold the line and looking for efficiencies. And so we identified a couple of years ago and then just have continued to update the sheet for different savings or efficiencies that the departments find. Now, I will say these aren't savings that all directly go just into our excess reserves or to our surplus, because what we end up doing is we find ways to be more efficient in one way. We utilize that and those efficiencies and those savings in something else. So we redirect those operational savings quite a bit. So let me jump into this document, and I got a better version on the PDF. And this shows a sample of some savings from over the last several fiscal years. The top section is showing on an individual basis, and so you can see if you look at just what happened specifically in those fiscal years, a grand total in a lot of different ways of finding a net benefit to the residents of about $2.2 million. And then if you take that and then also say, well, some of those savings they've identified were annual, and you apply that also going forward through the next 5 years, that total increases to about $4.3 million. And so I just point that out, not that there's any extra $4.3 million, because as I mentioned, a lot of these have already been spent in other ways based on the village's priorities and what the board is determined and assigned. But that these are good indications that our departments are always looking for ways to save money for the taxpayers and to do things the most efficient way possible. So the next couple of things I want to talk through are a quick overview of our major revenues, talking about COVID impact, and then the new revenues that I mentioned we'll discuss at the end will kind of be these cannabis and water rates. We'll talk about a streaming tax as well, just briefly in the budget. So this slide that appears to be blank. All right, well, there it goes. Okay. So you can see a pie chart showing the percentage of our revenues. As you can see, sales tax is a really big percentage, it's about a quarter of our revenues. Another almost the same amount would be our water sales at 19% and property tax at 18%. We'll talk a little bit about those. The video gaming and hotel motel taxes and places for eating tax, you can see make up a small percent of our overall budget, but because they were hit so drastically with this pandemic, we're going to talk about those in a little bit more detail as well. So starting off with sales tax, maybe starting off with sales tax. Okay, here we go. So you'll recall last fiscal year we came up with two scenarios. One was a bad case and one was a better case. The dark red line shows the bad case, the lighter red line or the pink line shows the better case, and then the green line shows the actual. And you can see that for sales tax, we outperformed even our better case all along. The big difference between the bad case and the better case was really looking at saying, what's the long-term impacts? Do we really think we're going to be back up to 100% of the prior year by the end of the fiscal year? And really, what we were really concerned about is, was this going to kick off a big recession that would take years and years to dig out of? We knew we had reserves to cover if it was a short term, but the real question was, how was it going to be long term? And so for sales tax, it certainly looks like we've been doing pretty well, and our current budget is, we're planning to budget for next year just a straight 100%, so assuming we're going to get the same amount that we had the year before. And this shows the sales tax trend over time.
No, it doesn't.
Well, apparently it doesn't. Let's go back and forward again. That shows the sales tax trend over time. And so you can see that in terms of where we're budgeting to get a little bit right about the amount we're projecting for this year, which is more than we got in 2020, more than we've budgeted for in the past, but slightly less than we actually received in 2019. Yeah.
I want to say one thing about sales tax. The Jewel at Cass and Ogden, they have 4 trucks. And I'll go into Jewel, every aisle will have an employee putting online services. And he took over Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby area is a central pool where they load the trucks. So according to Larry Fosberg, I don't know this for a fact, he said that delivery is not only in Westmont, it's also 4 other suburbs. So Westmont is benefiting from the sales tax from Cass and Ogden.
Absolutely, that's a really good point.
That's a good, yep.
So one of the great things about our sales tax and the way that it works here in the village is that we've been very fortunate that we've got a pretty diverse sales tax base. So we do have a lot of restaurants, as you know, we've got about 100 restaurants in town, which were hit really hard with the pandemic. But at the same time, we've also got several grocery stores. And as you know, grocery stores did pretty well during the pandemic. We have a lot of car dealers, and car dealers had some drops nationally, but then have kind of come back in terms of sales. And we're also fortunate enough to have a computer store, and my guess is during a pandemic when everyone started working from home, that store probably did a pretty good chunk of business. And so one of the things that we mentioned in our strategic plan is the idea that we want to have a diverse tax base. And I think we've really seen the benefits of that with this pandemic, is that while we lost in some sectors, we made up for it in others. And so now we're at the point where, yes, there was a drop in 2021, and you can definitely see that reduction, but it's not nearly as bad as it could have been because of that diverse base. So that's a great point. Thanks for pointing that out about. All right, so places for eating. You can see the actual trend on that one did a little better at the beginning of the pandemic than we thought it might, but then it kind of went down instead of going up, down through December. I will say January jumped up again, and that's back up by the better case. So that one's been a little bit not quite as quick to recover as the sales tax, which is not surprising because there's been a lot of times where dine-in service has been stopped and people haven't been able to dine in restaurants, and also where they can't have the same capacity they used to have. So we're projecting that we'll receive about 85% of our revenue there. So that's our budget for next year, is we're budgeting about 85% of what we had received. For it. Well, the next slide in your packet or your email, hopefully this will come through, shows the places for eating tax over time. Maybe. There it goes. All right. So you can see there that our places for eating tax, again, we're budgeting a little more than we had received the last time, but significantly still less than we had the prior time. So one thing that we have done in the budget is that gap between what we typically would have received and what we're receiving this year, we offset with our reserves as a one-time expenditure because it's a one-time loss in revenue.
Do we have any restaurants that are behind in their places for eating tax?
We do have some that are still behind. We've been sending out letters and reminders, and that's been doing a good job in terms of reminding them. We're probably getting close to the point where there's a few we're going to need to send a little bit more strongly worded letters and really have the letters come from either our attorney or our deputy liquor commissioner. That usually packs a little bit more weight. But we've had a lot of success in reminding people about it. And I will say we've had quite a few people that, as you'll recall, the board had said that we were going to be able to give a little bit of our economic stimulus out to places for eating that were in good standing with the village, and so they could have that up to $1,000 if they were in good standing. And so our letters that we've been sending out recently that have had some good results included in there the comment that, well, you're not in good standing yet. We'd like to give you this $1,000, and if you come up, during a current fiscal year while we still have the program in place, then we can still get you the money. And so we've had a few people that have responded with that, and so we're going to need to be kind of confirming they're still in good standing and getting out some of those checks to them. So that's been a good program to help encourage people to have a little bit of a carrot. And if that doesn't work for some of them, then we'll move a little more towards the stick side.
Thank you.
I'm going to try. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Video gaming. So you can see video gaming, in terms of how it actually goes, it's very closely tied to whether or not the video gaming places are allowed to be open or not. So you can see it drop down to 0, and then as soon as it was allowed again, it skyrocketed well over 100%, so high that it even went off the chart. So the chart ends at 125%, so you can see it just barely hit over 125% in August, so my guess is probably close to like 130% of the prior year's August. So there was a little bit of pent-up gaming. People didn't get a chance to game for a few months, and so then they went out and gamed some of what they would have done previously.
When did the stimulus checks arrive?
Good question.
What's that? Plus 6 machines now that a lot of them went to.
Yes, that's
And,
true.
Just for people that might be listening or something, video gaming was never meant to be a revenue source for the village, but what we've been able to do with that revenue is stop from making cuts, is to hold the line, but also not having to make cuts. So
Yep.
that additional revenue for the village has been a great assistance for us, so our services remain at the same level.
Yep, very true. All right, share that again. All right, so this one we are projecting that we'll get a little bit less than 100%, being a little bit conservative, but still better than our bad case from last time, so. That's our projections for video gaming going forward. And you can see its history overall, so our budget is sort of assuming things are back to a little bit more stable next year. We should be able to get more than we've budgeted for previously, but a little less than we actually received in 2019. Hotel Motel has not been performing nearly as well as that. You can see we sort of expected it would drop a lot early on and then that it would grow and continue growing, and that worked for the first few months. But then I think we were sort of a little bit too optimistic about what would happen the next few months of the pandemic, and so instead it kind of hovered right around between 40 and 20% for the last several months. And so what we're budgeting for this year is extending that trend a little bit and saying we expect for the first several months that it won't get more than 20%, and then, you know, projecting it edging up a little bit over time to where at the very end we hope that by April we're back to 80% of what we had been. Overall, it's a grand total of roughly about 40% increase. Sorry, it's roughly 40% of what we had the prior year, so we're looking at a 60% decrease and only getting about 40% of what we had received. That's kind of the overall average of that, but we're hoping it goes up, kind of like we'd hoped last time, only a little bit less steeply than we thought last time, and that it would take longer before it can actually increase. So we'll see how that goes. And then you can see over time, big drop the last couple of years, and even our projection for next year is less than the year we just had. For utility tax, you can see that it's been going down for the last several years. It continues on its downward trend. The biggest reason for that is the telecom. You can see the green bar back in 2012 was much larger, and then it's a really small green bar now, 2021. And the biggest reason for that is that this is the tax on the use of phones, but not the use of data or internet. And so on your phone bill, if you think about it, my guess is if yours is like mine, the amount where you pay for being able to talk on the phone is a lot less than the amount that you pay for other pieces. And a lot of people, you know, just roll things all together and have plans that just kind of cover everything, instead of breaking out like, here's the amount for just talking on a phone. And so this tax...
On the phone, what's that?
Yeah, right? Yeah. So this tax was really a tax that made a lot of sense when it was first implemented years and years ago, but more and more it's being a tax on something that is not being used as much. And so that's why it's gone down a lot. I will say a number of years ago, the village talked about that and kind of noted the downward trend and said, well, you know, it's a tax on something that's not, you know, is in touch with the current world, and so it's just dwindling. Recently, the state has authorized something called a tax on streaming services that we could look into, and in essence, I kind of think of that like a replacement for this utility telecom tax, a tax that's now on something that nobody's using. Instead, now there's a tax on things that people are starting to use again. And so we don't have that built into the budget. That's not something the board's talked about at all. It's something that we may want to look at, and probably sometime during this year we'll want to bring it up in an administration finance committee, be able to get some information on it. It's kind of a complicated law, and there's a lot of complexities to it, so John would have to look into it a little bit. But something we could explore going forward to deal with that downward trend, but not necessarily something we have to do, and we're not counting on doing it as part of this budget. This slide shows our property tax extended revenue. You can see it goes up a little bit, and largely this is just the inflationary growth. So we get a little bit of new construction, but not a lot. As noted previously, a lot of the new construction is happening in areas where we're able to spur its development by use of the TIF, and so those go to the TIF to increase those revenues. So this largely is our inflationary amount that we get, and you can see a lot of it goes to funding the police pension, because years and years and years ago, before people really realized the importance of putting money aside for the pension, and it was kind of a thing for the future, we didn't necessarily put as much money aside. We used it for other things like building of roads or other services back those years ago. I will say for the past 10 years or so, the village has done a really great job of meeting what the actuary suggests we put in there, and so it's been growing a lot less because of that. but we still have a portion of it that is still outstanding from prior services. So we still have that as a big piece of our property tax. Any questions on the revenue trends overall?
Just a quick, ambulance, that's a charge the resident would pay out of property tax?
Yes, so on the property tax, some places levy a specific amount that just says general amount, we can use it for anything we want to in the village. The Village of Westmont does not have that and can't get that now without a referendum because we didn't have it when the tax extension law went into effect. And so we levy property taxes for a few specific things. One of those things is for fire and another one is for ambulance. And so kind of the way that I've heard it explained is kind of the property taxes towards ambulances are really there to help the ambulance be available and be around so that people can use it if they need to. But then the actual use of it is what people pay for through their insurance and those kind of things. So this amount that covers this doesn't actually cover the full cost of having an ambulance and the ambulance program.
I see.
So,
Thank you.
but we sort of subsidize it so residents don't have to pay the full cost of it themselves. All right. Now we're going to jump just at least briefly into the actual budget itself. I'm going to scroll down to that section on the PDF, so I think that'll be easier to see. All right, so this is the similar format to what we've had before, where you can see we list all of our expenditures in terms of the priorities identified in our strategic plan. Governance, identity and image, the downtown economic development and infrastructure, and then we also list them crossed by fund. So starting with the general fund, we expect that we will have about the 6 million, and that's the 6 million that we expect for a recommended minimum balance. That's our 20% that we talked about. And so we expect to actually have a net of almost $2,000 more than our recommended minimum balance. And so as you'll recall, it's kind of an odd thing, but with our new financial system, negative numbers are actually good. So the numbers in parentheses are what we want to see. So revenues are in parentheses and expenditures are not. So when you have a net total that's in parentheses, that's a good thing and you're above the minimum balance. And then you can see our excess reserve fund, which is the next fund over, is starting the year with about $14 million, transferring about 10 million of that out. Some of that's going to the general fund for some one-time expenditures and for carryovers, but a lot of that is going to the capital projects like we talked about at the Admin Finance Committee meeting, and a lot of it's going to the TIF to be able to fund the development of the upfront costs related to the development at 1 North Cass. But we still expect to have, even after we set aside another $3 million for minimum balance in the excess reserve, we expect to have another $3 million on top of that. And then we'll dive into some of these other funds a little bit later. I will note that the debt service fund has a number that's not in parentheses, and so that's not what we would like to do. Ideally, the way debt service fund works is you would have each year at the beginning of the year, you have enough to cover all your debt expenses that whole year. That's how you typically want to set them up, and that's our goal. And usually that works really well because we issue bonds, and the first year that we issue the bonds, we don't make payments on them, but we take the money and put it aside to start setting the fund up. And then the next year when we make payments, that's when we're moving the second payment into the fund. When we set up our 2017 bond, the rates were such that we could get the best deal if we ended up making a payment right away. And so with that, we didn't have a year to build up that extra amount. So we're about $700,000 less than the total amount we'd like to have, but it's okay because we still get in the right amount of money each year. We can still afford the payment, and there's not a big issue with that. All right, so then going on to some of the individual funds in the capital projects. So our convention and tourism, we're looking at ending balance, even with the significantly reduced revenues as we showed. We're going to be digging into reserves this year because, again, that's a short one-time thing for revenues. But even after those reductions, and even after increasing our budget to be able to fund a little more for the 100th anniversary, we're still looking at an estimated ending balance of about $533,000. We'd like to have about $355,000, and so we have more money than we need to have in that fund, even with the big loss of revenues. That's another indication that if we were to receive home rule, we'd have some money to work with, because over the last several years, we've got more money in hotel motel taxes than we've spent, and so it's accumulated these reserves, which have been great for now because they've helped us with this tough time. But it's a good indication that we really could be using that money for other services for our residents, not just for convention and tourism. The next couple, the capital, stormwater, motor fuel, and Rebuild Illinois. Also, you can see with all of those, we still have a balance in excess of what we've suggested as our minimum balance. The Rebuild Illinois is something that has to be used over the next 3 years, so we don't say we have any balance that we need to get in there. We just sort of expect to spend what we can. The next page looks at some of our specific use funds, and again, you'll note that all of them, we've got money in excess of where we've set our minimum goal, with the exception of the TIFs, where we have no extra money because this money for TIFs is excluding the amount that the TIF owes the village. So the TIF owes the village more money than it has in terms of cash, because the village has fronted the TIF money to be able to do things. And again, is fronting the TIF money to be able to help with this One North Cass project, fronted some money to help with the SWBD project down at 63rd and Cass, and fronted money to purchase things like the BNSF Railroad, some other properties in the downtown area. So the TIFs owe the village money, so really there's not any kind of minimum balance. Our minimum balance that we should keep really is whatever we have in there, because it's still negative money because it still owes the village money. So any questions on the overall kind of fund balance, ending of funds, any of that? So I will say kind of grand total, we are expecting to start the year grand total of all the different funds for all the different specific individual purposes, starting with about $50 million, getting about 45 million in, excluding the transfers, spending about 79,000. We expect to end with about 31,000. Of that, we hope we have about 21,000 that we would say this is what we'd like to keep on hand. 21 million. Thank you.
You almost slipped that one by us.
Million. Yep, 21 million. All those numbers were millions. And then, so that's 10 over what we need. So we have money to be able to use if we needed to in a lot of these different areas.
Spencer, when you say 21 million, that's our set goal of 20% of each fund balance we want to make sure is in reserve?
I will say for the general fund, it's 20%. So kind of for our operating funds, we've set it at 20%. For our capital funds, we've set it as 100% of the revenues we get in. So not the expenditures, because the expenditures vary so much from year to year. It's really just based on which road we're improving. And so we say, let's try to make sure we have 100% of 1 year's worth of revenues. So the 700,000 we get in, or the roughly million we get in. So that's kind of how we've set those other funds.
But on top of the 21 million, you kind of set a goal, we're at 10 million more. That's excess reserve.
Yeah, so we have 10 million excess reserve.
Okay.
Yep, we have 10 million above those goals. Yep. Screen again. All right, so in addition to, focusing on financial stability, a big thing of what the budget does is reflect our priority and show our priority. And so with that, I want to talk briefly about our priorities. I think for a lot of people, you're aware of this. Some of the newer people may not be aware of it. We've got two types of priorities that we've identified. One are from our strategic plan, our components of our vision of our strategic plan, which we did in 2016, and the idea was, here's our plan to get us to 2021. And so you'll note that we're at 2021, and so one of the things that you'll note in the budget is some money set aside for updating the strategic plan, getting a new strategic plan for going forward. But in addition to that, we've realized that strategic plan can identify some important things, but it's also important to, again, get that snapshot in time and say, what's going on right now, what's important now. And so right before last budget year, we did an exercise where we had these budget bucks where all the trustees, all the elected officials had printed out Westmont bucks, which they put in a variety of different buckets to kind of represent the identification of priorities. And then, of course, what happened was 2021 hit, and our main short-term priority was surviving COVID-19. And so all the short-term priorities really got pushed over to this year's budget to talk through. And as mentioned at an earlier committee meeting, we just kind of carried those forward. So you'll notice there's quite a bit of overlap between our strategic plan and our short-term priorities. Specifically, economic development, vibrant downtown, and infrastructure are listed in both. And so the next couple slides are going to talk through some of the short-term priorities and kind of how we're doing and what's in the budget about them. So this slide shows economic development and shows the commercial and attached residential construction values over the last several years. It might be a little hard to see. I'll try to zoom in a little bit more. But some of those numbers are kind of small to fit everything in. But since 2012, we've had a total of about $131 million worth of investment in our town. Again, this is for commercial or apartments. And so you can see in 2020, there was a large amount. A good chunk of that was due to the One West Quincy development that we can see going up just down the street from us. And so far in 2021, so these are calendar year figures, and so far since January through, part of April, looks like we've already had another $4.7 million of investment already. So I feel like we're doing a pretty good job in terms of economic development overall, but always room to continue going with that, and it's a priority in our budget. And so you'll see that we've got quite a bit of things identified and working towards that. And this slide just gives a brief overview of some of those big pieces. One North Cass, the Tif Analysis, where we set aside money so that we've got a Tif consultant who can help us analyze projects and make sure they're economically viable, and that we're giving the right amount, not giving too much away. We've got $50,000 included in here for a review of local ordinances that will help us be able to make sure we're, understand how our ordinances impact developers. We've got $10,000 for some architectural review to be able to help make sure as we review the building plans that we're getting what we were promised with the renderings. And then we're looking at restoring our grants. That $130,000 includes a couple of different pieces. It includes the $100,000 we've got in case we need it for additional community stimulus. It also includes restoring our roughly $30,000 of life safety grants. I think we had said about 15,000 of those are for life safety grants within the downtown, and about 15,000 for life safety grants anywhere else in the village. And then I think there's about $750 which we set aside for a program that was identified by Westmont First. The idea being that if businesses are doing events that are not generally community-wide events, but specific to their business, for something related to their business, but not something they do kind of every year and all the time, we could help them with promoting that and contributing a little bit to that. So I don't think we've had any businesses take advantage of that yet, but we are bringing that off of hold and kind of restoring that in our budget. And then we also have our economic development partnership with the Chamber. And last year, I think we mentioned it briefly, one of the considerations or one of the things we wanted to do was to increase the amount we had paid them. When we first set our amounts with them, there was no escalator, nothing that increased the amount that we paid them over time. But what we have realized is that we had set aside some money for to be able to go a couple of different routes and kind of set them as contingency. Like if we go these routes and if we hire interns to create a database of vacant properties, then we can pay a little bit more just specifically for those pieces. So that was adopted a couple of years ago, but we never went forward with any of those pieces. And so what we're proposing to do is take that money that we were going to set aside for those kind of optional things and really just work on giving it to the Chamber so that we can really pay them for the service they're providing. We'll probably be able to, look at connecting with them and renegotiating and probably have some kind of increasing fee that goes on, like most of our contracts have, some kind of inflationary increase with that. So we'll be working with the Chamber on that, and that's included in the budget as well, even though it didn't increase our overall costs. So any questions on economic development stuff before we move on to our next priority about the downtown? All right, sorry.
I'd just like to comment. Both of those programs, the Economic Development Partnership and also the grant, are great programs, and it's great to see those back because a lot of businesses have taken advantage of those grants, and we see that there's a value in the community when we see improvements. So, just really happy to see those back in there.
Thank you. I would agree. I think it's important to get those back in there to be able to offer that out to the businesses because I think it can be a real big help to them. Definitely. All right, the next priority that was identified as a high priority, short-term priority for the village board a couple of years ago, last year, was creating a vibrant downtown. And you can see this chart. This is a comparison that was done by Larry Forsberg from our Chamber of Commerce about the vacancy rates in downtown from 2013 till now. And you can see it's been a huge drop in vacancy from 27 business vacancies down to 15. I think that, again, is an indication we're moving in the right direction with a lot of the things that we've done. So as you'll recall, there was focus on a comprehensive plan. We set up the TIFs. We focused on it in our strategic plan, and then it's been a major topic of our ongoing Westmont Economic Development Partnership meetings that we have with the Chamber and our rapid response team in terms of trying to come up with some good projects and focusing on things downtown. I think some of the things you'll notice that have happened downtown or are in the process is we've got the One North Cast we've already talked about in the budget. We also have economic development agreements, you'll recall, with 1 West Quincy and 11 West Quincy, where we're committing to give them some portion of that back, similar to developer notes. Once those projects are up and running and generating those TIF revenues, then they'll be hitting the budget. So they're not in this year's budget, but they will be. I think Urban Vet, I think there's a lot of things that we've seen happen in the downtown recently that are very encouraging. We've also got a lot of money in the budget for some alleys in the downtown. As you know, we've been doing a lot of alley improvements down there, which helps with stormwater as well, but also making the downtown a little bit nicer and a little bit better. We've also got money set aside for railroad right-of-way landscape and depot, money for the Addington Plaza, and then there's a requested increase, which is in the draft budget for this increase, for general broad category of sort of the downtown beautification, the flowers, the plantings, the greenery, the lights on the trees, those kind of things. So moving from $41,500 up to $74,000. And then similarly, restoring the grants in the downtown area for the facade grants and life safety grants there as well. All right, anything else on downtown before I move on to infrastructure? Okay, so infrastructure, there's a couple of things. A couple of these are points that Director Ramsey had highlighted at the last committee meeting, but are worth repeating, I think. So in terms of infrastructure, this graph shows the road conditions, and you can see what a large portion of our roads are in good, very good, or excellent condition. And so that's a good indication that things are going well. As I mentioned at the Admin Finance Committee meeting, we had to bond in 2013 for a lot of road resurfacing. And we also have some road resurfacing that's going to be in this next budget. We also talked a little bit about the infrastructure portion of the stormwater. And you can see we've invested about $10 million in stormwater spending over the last several years. And, as we noted, if, our main contribution from the general fund had been $45,000 per year for that general maintenance, to be able to have spent $10 million over the course, with a couple of different bonds and getting that stormwater sales tax has been really instrumental in allowing us to tackle a lot of those problems.
And Spencer,
Yeah.
the road conditions, we had it updated.
Yes,
And,
that's,
I know everybody says that their road needs improvement, but based on that condition study, we only got about 22%, 19 that is fair and 3 that are marginal. So
yep.
where it was 60%, when I think we issued those bonds, our roads were, over half were fair or below. So,
That sounds right.
That's true.
yeah.
Yep.
So this is a great indication that we're almost there.
Yeah. Yep. Doing great with that, I think.
I don't know how Cass in the tracks doesn't get a poor rating, but I would leave that to the rating, I guess.
There's always, yeah,
Might be the one.
Yeah, that might be the, maybe that's the marginal one. So in the budget, we've got a lot in there for infrastructure. You can see for road resurfacing, the last couple of years, we've not done a resurfacing program. As you recall, we were saving some of those revenues coming in to be able to do a larger project because then we can get a better deal on it. And so that's what we're looking at this year, as well as some road construction, stormwater improvements, water main improvements, and then water tower design.
Spencer,
Yeah.
real quick, I don't know if you know this, but Mike Ramsey told us that a mile of road resurfacing, I forgot what he said, $1 million, it costs to do that, just resurfacing. That's what I thought he said, so.
Yeah, Ron, I remember that, and then it was,
That's what he
to
said.
rebuild a block was $1 million, to rebuild it, so if you let it go, you pay. A question, Spencer, on the bonds for the road conditions and the bonds for the stormwater. How much more do we have to pay on those bonds?
20-year bonds.
Yeah, so the one was 2013.
Yep. So that would end in 2033, and then we had a 2017 that would end in 2037.
Yeah, just in my head, I'm wondering if we should pay them back more aggressively to get rid of the debt. I don't know if that's, I'm not a
Yeah.
financial guy, but it just seems to me if I have a big balance on my credit card, I want to pay it off sooner if I can, so it's not hanging. Especially like when the roads are in good shape. I know we have to deal with road repairs and road resurfacing, but can we pay those down more aggressively? And then, that, I'm leaving it to your expertise. but
Yeah,
that's-
so there are stipulations about that we can't pay them down too early because the people that bought the bonds and invested in us want to make sure they get their return. So there's rules about when we can, and I want to say it's like 10 years is a pretty common time frame that we say, look, if you buy these bonds from us, we promise you we're not going to pay them off early, at least for the first 10 years. Now, we do have some options. We could look at refinancing, and we could look at issuing some new bonds to pay off the old ones, and then we put the money in a special bank account that then just pays off the bonds, and it's almost like we'd paid them off. So we can look into that. One of the downsides with that kind of a thing is what happens is, at least under the current law, I believe what happened was those bonds are not tax-free to refinance, and so we can't really save the same kind of money we used to be able to save with doing a refinance. So refinances don't work as well, and we can't just, unlike a credit card where you could pay extra and it would just go against the principal, we can't do that with these kind of bonds. We have to do what's called calling the bonds, and we can't do that for 10 years. And then you have to call them like you can't just like pay off chunks of the principal because it's, lots of different people that own these bonds for us. So it's a good idea, and we're certainly looking into it. We've reached out to our financial advisors just to kind of talk about refinancing and, floated some ideas by them. So we'll probably look at some more and maybe bringing it up again for another admin finance committee in the future. But it's a good idea worth looking into. It's just a little complicated.
It's a complicated
Yeah.
solution.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm looking at is,
Yep.
if we have all these little, call them little debts or big debts,
Yeah.
whatever. And then we have to go out and get more bonds for other things. So now we have, instead of 5, now we've got 10.
Right.
And, that's something, if you're comfortable with it, I'm happy, but,
Yeah, but it's definitely something worth looking into and kind of saying, can we get one bond that covers off, portions of these others, sort of consolidating some of our bonds and getting a lower rate.
yeah, that's a good idea. The
If you can get lower
consolidation.
rates, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So those are kind of things we look into, and we'll try when we can. It's just lots of extra arms and legs.
Yeah, thank you.
That's
Yeah.
great point.
So the next priority that was identified by the board was community safety. And so there's a lot of things that I think you've already recently heard about, especially at some of the more recent committee meetings. But this includes in the budget, we include a fire candidate program for about $25,000. That's where we get a lot of kind of new people and kind of walk them through all the different pieces. And it's more like starting as an intern instead of just saying, trying to hire whoever's available. We kind of help train these people and get them kind of through the entire process, sponsoring them through the academy and all of those pieces. So we pay for them to go to the academy, we pay for equipment for them, but the long-term return is really high in that we have these people that are a lot more likely to stay, and it will really help solidify our program and our staff. As you know, we've had some issues with some turnover, and we think that this kind of program will help with that. So there's a little bit set aside for that. There's also some continuing to increase our COVID-19 supplies in terms of budget. We've got money in there for items related to the police reform legislation. There's some training that may have to happen. We've got some money set aside for that. There's also money in our capital projects fund to purchase body-worn cameras. That's something I mentioned at the admin finance committee meeting, that we don't expect to actually purchase them and use them right now because of some issues with the legislation, but we are looking to set aside the money so that we can purchase them either if the legislation changes or if we move forward with it on a different year. At least we've committed the money.
Spencer, I had a quick
Yeah.
question. In light of what just happened in the city of Chicago, our police reform legislation, how often do our police officers train?
Do you want to address that, Chief?
That's a pretty broad question. The short answer is we're continually training. The differences are what is mandated by stat or by law now. That was just what we were doing by policy. So a lot of the policy training requirements have now shifted to state law. So it's kind of, in our minds it's seamless because we've been staying on top of this the entire time. But the state keeps on adding more training, longer training, off-site training. So it comes in a lot of different forms for us. We do in-house training. We send people out. We do a lot of online training, which meets the mandates because a lot of it's just kind of educational stuff. But there's a mandate now that we have to have role-playing exercises, which we do, but now it's mandated by law, so we have to expand that. So it's a never-ending process of training for us. But in keeping in mind when we do have to send people off-site and they're in patrol or we have to backfill that position in order, because we're taking somebody off the street and then sending them to training someplace else. So there's those kind of hidden costs as well.
Thank you.
So we've talked about the police reduction in overtime. There's about $773,000 in terms of, again, efficiencies or savings related to vehicle postponements. So there's several different pieces that make this up. In the police department, there's a couple of vehicles that, per the terms of our vehicle replacement program, we would expect that we might be needing to replace them now, but the police have been able to make them last a little bit longer, and so we're postponing them yet another year. I think both of them were ones that, in theory, could have been replaced last year. They weren't because everything was on hold, and the police have been able to make it without replacing them again this year. So that's a portion of that vehicle postponement. Another big piece of it is related to our fire squad vehicle. And so that's one that initially we expect to replace it next year or the year after for about $900,000. And we've realized that instead of doing that, we can actually refurbish it for about $150,000 and expect it to last another 10 years or so. So that seems to be a really good idea. And so what we're doing is we're planning to refurbish that for somewhere between $100,000 to $150,000. And then we are not going to be setting aside money for it. So each year, as part of the vehicle replacement program, we set aside $44,000 to be able to replace this large vehicle when it finally comes due. And so what Fire thinks is that if we get it to last for another 10 years, we may not even need to replace it at that point because of how things may work and shared equipment and those kind of things. So we're being able to generate quite a significant savings with that. In addition, we've extended the amount of time that we think ambulances will last. We had it to where we had 3 ambulances and we had 2 of them on a 7-year cycle and 1 of them on a 10-year cycle. And that didn't really make a lot of sense. It makes a lot more sense to shift them all to a 9-year cycle. So we're replacing an ambulance every 3 years. Kind of like in patrol, we replace 3 of the patrol cars every year. And so we're shifting to that kind of a thing in the fire, and that also saves about $8,000 a year because we're expanding the life of the ambulances a little bit. And so between the two departments, we've got about $773,000 worth of savings for vehicle postponement. And then the budget also includes road salt increase and cost for lead service. So any questions on community safety before we move on to the next?
Thank Trustee Barry for calling that to our attention as far as vehicle extending the life instead of every 3 years, and making sure we look at all of our vehicles a little different. So thank you, Trustee Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, but that was at Trustee Addington's lead. He just made me speak up for it. That's all.
All right, and then the last short-term priority that was identified is the safe routes to school. And so things in the budget that deal specifically with that priority include an increase in terms of crossing guards. So that's going up about $4,000. We are looking to still connect with schools about covering that cost, but our side of the expense is going up about $4,000. In addition to that, we've got requests to increase our concrete sidewalk cutting. So that's kind of like smoothing out the sidewalks from $35,000 to $50,000, so we can do a little bit more of that each year. And then also the amount of concrete that we're purchasing going from $40,000 to $50,000, so we can do a little bit more of the minor sidewalk projects internally. So that's what the concrete helps with. And then we've got a total of $735,000 listed in terms of sidewalk projects. So there's a lot that we're devoting to this priority because it is one of the short-term priorities that was identified. So there's a lot in the budget about that.
Good.
Any questions before I move on?
Point out the fact that crossing guards is something the village has paid for, even though we weren't really required to, but we felt it was important through the years that we provide that for all our schools. So.
Yep. Yeah, and they pay a portion of the cost, and I think the plan that's sort of been discussed all along is to try to increase that percentage that they pay of those costs.
In Spencer sidewalk projects, we will not spend that much, but that's been a priority for this board is to, and I don't know if I'm complimenting Trustee Barry, but he's the one who's pointed a lot of this out. So I think it's important that we put this much money out this year.
Agreed. Yep. All right. So we're going to go through now what's other things that are in the budget. So kind of looking at it more by fund instead of just by our short-term priority. And then we've got also attached in here is a large, kind of a list of all of our large projects. So looking through what is included in the budget this year, down slightly. So the first set of pages is about our capital funds. So that's the convention tourism, our capital projects fund, the MFT and the MFT Rebuild Illinois, and our stormwater fund. And so you can see some of those key items in governance, which is again providing the necessary equipment for employees to be able to serve the public. As you recall, a couple of years ago, these pages were a lot longer and we had a lot more things on the list. And then it was kind of talked about, if there's things that are less than $100,000, maybe some of them make sense to call out, but a lot of them could probably just be all grouped together with a lump sum of all these projects that individually are less than 100,000 are a grand total of, and in this case, under governance and capital, about 560,000. So you can see the list that's here. A couple of things I will point out. We've already talked about the body-worn cameras. I will point out that there is some extrication equipment being replaced in the fire department. That's a large amount. There's also, you can see kind of the list there. We're doing stuff on the railroad right-of-way for landscaping. Under the identity and image, you can see we've got, again, our amounts for Richmond Gardens. We've got our 100th anniversary. So in terms of the 100th anniversary, we'd set aside about $100,000 grand total like 5 years ago. We spent a little bit each year. This year we kind of come into the budget with about 60,000. It's probably a little bit less because we'll be spending some. So it kind of started the year with 60,000. We're spending a little bit of that already. About 20,000 of that is set aside for a video project and another 40,000 for some other expenditures, some of which we've probably already spent, and so we probably won't really spend that whole amount. But really what we're looking for right now is an increase of $50,000 more, so a grand total of $150,000 for the 100th anniversary over the, it's really for the first 5, the 95th through the 100th anniversary. Then we have our standard auto mile beautification, contributions to the chamber, special events, those kind of items, largely in our convention tourism. And then in our infrastructure, as you would expect, those are largely focused in our capital, MFT, and stormwater funds.
Can I ask about
Yeah.
the gateway here? So
Yeah, so,
there's some money there, and then on this other one that was the previous email, it lists a couple of projects there.
yeah, so there was identified a number of years ago, several different places for some gateway signs. The gateway that's listed on the page under 2I&I in convention tourism is really some wayfinding signs around the downtown, and gateway signs like kind of, I guess really less gateway, more wayfinding, kind of a combination of the two in the downtown. So that's money that we set aside several years ago. We've kind of just kept it in here. I will say I don't know exactly what the plans are for that money. And that's probably something that, if worse comes to worse and hotel revenues don't pick back up, I think that's something that makes sense to not spend right now. And instead to just kind of wait and see what happens with the hotel motel tax revenues. If they don't pick up, then maybe we, again, keep that on hold, wait to see what happens before we start spending that kind of money with wayfinding signs in the downtown.
I guess the reason I'm interested in it is because we've talked about several different gateway
Yeah.
projects and things, and we went through a lot of work in developing some beautiful signs and the wayfinding and
Yeah.
all of that. And then we talked about the Cass Avenue median, and
Yep.
we've talked about up by the hotel and, over by Route 83 and all of these things.
Yeah,
And I would hope there's a way to see that to start to materialize in that, to me, it's an identity thing, and it's very important. Why it doesn't, it doesn't do a lot for you, but it does a lot for you in that it gives us the identity and the things, I remember when they planted trees in Bolingbrook on the medians. And what a difference it made, from concrete and crap to line treescapes.
Yeah.
And just to see that progress happen, these things are, were identified as important. I just hope that we are able to see that move forward now, some of it.
And we are, and Spencer, identified it correctly. It was just kind of the aggressiveness slowed down, but you will recognize we did do the median installation on Ogden Avenue, Pasquinelli to Oakwood. So we're proceeding with that. We're ready-ish to do the one over, by Cumner. The North Cass Avenue was a good example of where that was kind of postponed, not only just the economy, but there was a relationship with the hotel and the resort about
Right.
maintaining it, and those relationships are changing too. So they're all in the works, but not fast, yes.
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
And I just, all I'm saying is, I think it's important. I'm not
Yeah.
saying we gotta do them all, but we are making progress.
yes,
So
and
that's
they're still
great.
in the budget, so.
Yep.
Steve, can you answer about the Richmond Gardens, the additional money going into there? What's the next
The
item that's gonna
specific
happen?
improvements, I cannot. I don't know if, Mr. Ramsey, attending remotely, has got any more detail, but we have the Richmond Education Garden and Apiary is a joint public improvement with the village of Westmont and the village of Clarendon Hills. And there are other partners, from chamber level and other organizations and all on a smaller level, but the two big participants are the two municipalities. So we do that, and we have an annual infusion into that because it's being built, in parts, and they're very successful at getting donated materials and systems in there as well from other partners. And there was a Commonwealth Edison grant, and so It's just to continue progress. It was not all built at once.
My understanding, from the EIC, involvement with Mr. Yater and his care for that too, is that we were in partnership with them and, Clarendon Hills, and they were able to do very well to kind of jumpstart it. And Mike Ramsey has been very good at providing staff and labor for a lot of the projects there to keep our costs down, which was, great for Mike to be able to do that, to kind of pick and choose what Westmont could participate in, which was a better value to us than outside of, going out and buying a bunch of things and bring it there. And it's come a long way
Yeah, it's
in the last
nice.
few years. So I'm gonna say we're almost
It's
We're almost there.
Yeah, so,
We're almost-
so what's listed in the budget, the total of that 94,000 includes our $19,000 that we contribute each year towards it, and then $75,000, up to $75,000 for some pervious paving. Now, I'm not sure where we stand on that pervious paving, whether it's been done or not. My guess is not, but that makes up that 94,000.
Thank you.
Is that, with the capital pavers, is that something that we share with Clarendon Hills on those big items, or just the 19,000?
So I think there is like we do some pieces, they do some pieces, and it sort of comes out in.
But all added together, it's
Yeah.
shared
It's a
very
shared thing,
evenly.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yep. All right, so there's another mention of Cass Ave, the new median and gateway. And then there's also a number of, once we get onto the big long list of projects, you'll see a large, or at least some portion of this, things that are less than 100,000 are also other gateway signs that are included in the budget. So there's some aspects that are listed in here for that. And then see some of those kind of transfers around for the debt and those kind of things. The next page lists the specific use funds, and you can see in the VRP, we talked about that refurbishing of the squad, the vehicle replacement, as well as some carryover vehicles that we've ordered and tried to get but haven't come in yet, and so technically they're accounted for and will actually be paid in the budget year when we get them. From the DEA fund, we're looking at doing a license plate reader and also some improvements to the police facility. Now, an interesting thing about that, I think was mentioned, this was probably mentioned a while ago, and so probably some of the newer trustees haven't heard about this, but in order to use the DEA funds for any work on a facility, we have to first do a study to make sure that it's not causing problems environmentally or to historical sites. So my understanding is there was some issue somewhere out, in some other state where they were putting some firing range somewhere and it was going to cause some major environmental impacts to some neighboring entities. And so with that, the federal government now has a rule that in order to use it for anything like this, we have to do a study. So we've got $40,000 set aside for a study. We've been told they can be expensive and might get that high. My guess is, to say we're doing some internal building remodeling, it's probably not going to be $40,000 for a study, both to identify the historical impacts of remodeling something inside the police station that's existed there already, and probably similar for environmental impacts. So, but the amount we were given from the federal government in terms of you should plan for is up to $40,000. So we're planning for up to $40,000 of village money to be able to spend $120,000 of DEA fund money. So we'll see, hopefully it'll end up being less than the 40,000, but overall it's worth it because we're, spending a smaller amount of money to access a larger amount of money. It's just feels odd. Then you can see the TIF and some money set aside in case things need to happen on the other TIF. So any questions on this page of the specific use funds?
Again, these are just like you said, the expenses. The income side is the
Yep.
revenue side.
Yep.
Somewhere else, and some of these are offset. I know the page before the train station, there's potentially some grant money we're receiving for that. So even though it shows 770, whatever it was, thousand, we offset that, and it's in the income side, revenue side on our budget then.
Yep.
So that's not, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Just a
yep.
point.
Assuming we're gonna get those, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Right, the next page shows our VRP revenues, which really this is our long-term assumptions for how long we think vehicles will last and how we determine how much we set aside each year for the vehicles. And so you'll notice that 44,000 that we're no longer putting into the vehicle replacement program for the squad, and then the $8,000 to $9,000 we talked about for the ambulances. Then we move on to general fund operating considerations. We've already talked about the personnel stuff previously at executive session, so I'm not going to dwell on those. I will say there's some increases that are, tied in with contractual increases, some grant funds that we need to make sure we do in the crossing guard and the police reform requirements, as well as some extra costs because we are replacing officers, and so we're replacing more officers now than we had in past years, so those hiring costs are going up. So the cost to send them to the academy, to equip them, those kind of things, our police department. And then in the Public Works Fund, you can see we've got the salt that we talked about, the sidewalk cutting program, the sidewalks. The light replacement, so we've been historically replacing 5 lights per year at 5,000 apiece, so that's 25,000. We're looking to double that and move up to replacing 10 lights per year, so that's an extra 25,000 on top of that. Then the next, so before we move on, any questions on those operating considerations? I know there weren't very many. All right, the next one talks about village-wide personnel operating considerations, and so as in prior years, we've broken this down into just so you can see the dollar figures for a cost for an agreed-upon increase and a cost for a 2% general wage adjustment. That's the same general wage adjustment that is in the union contract, and so the union employees and the non-union will be receiving the same 2.0% general wage adjustment, and you can see the cost for agreed-upon increases. I will note that you'll see the police department has a high amount in terms of agreed-upon increases. As you're aware, the FOP contract has a step program, and so it's sort of the double-edged sword. As we get less senior officers, they're paid less, and so the overall budget goes down for personnel for police because we're not paying the higher, more senior officers. But at the same time, each year, the amount that they increase goes up a lot more because they're still moving up those steps. So we save money, and then we start accumulating the expenditures again. So any questions on that?
Spencer, the 2% general wage, of course, the FOPs at that, and we apply it across the board, but our cost of living with the assessment and the new growth, is it close to that 2%? Because that's the new money we get from property taxes, right? The cost
Yeah.
of living that the county declares, plus any new growth would increase your
Yeah, let me pull
tax
that up.
dollars. So I'm just curious, it's gotta be pretty close.
Yeah. Yeah, it's,
And that's only new tax dollars, doesn't take into account, sales tax or anything else, but
Right.
that's a good way to look at it as far as what increases we're doing.
yeah. Yeah, so the CPI that's listed for the increase in terms of, not the new construction, but just the overall increase for CPI this year is 2.3%. So that's what the property taxes are going, is the 2.3% increase for CPI.
And then on top of that's the new growth.
Yes, on top
So-
of that's the new growth.
okay.
So it's already covered there. Yep.
Good.
Yep. Then we move into the one-time considerations, and so we've talked about a lot of these. There was a few things that were already done in 2021, so they were requested and then not improved in the final budget because we realized we had the money to just take care of them, especially some small IT things. We've got the $100,000 for the local community stimulus. We've got a grand total of an estimate of roughly $165,000 grand total for branding and strategic plan, kind of interchangeably. And then we've got CCTV server replacements, some door access controls, and then mobile data computer replacements of about $96,000. Some duct cleaning that'll be done, the fire candidate program that we've talked about,
Hey, Spencer,
and trees. Yeah,
the Public Works duct cleaning,
Yeah.
is that due to the new construction and it wasn't part of the contract?
No, so this is duct cleaning in kind of all the different village buildings. So it's
Oh, so
a
this
grand
is
total.
all, I was gonna say you should do that in every building.
Yes, yep, that's what it's doing.
Periodically.
Public Works facilities.
Okay.
Yep, so they're covering the cost for all the different buildings. That's all built in.
Great.
Yep. Yep. And then in the identity and image portion, you'll see a note in here for trees. And there's a couple of different pieces with the trees and what's kind of in the budget and what's not in the budget. So there are several different categories. There's a couple of one-time expenditures that are kind of, there's like a tree inventory and, you know, that's kind of a big piece that we're looking at doing for, you know, a few $1,000s. And then the majority of these costs are initially a request for additional pruning. So right now we spend about $80,000 a year in terms of pruning our trees, and that takes a long time to get through the entire village. Initially there was the thought or the request to increase that up to about $220,000 per year, with the idea that that could get us on a 5-year cycle to do the entire village. As you're aware, our ongoing operating revenues are pretty tight, and so those are always the hardest ones to find. It's a lot easier to find one-time expenditures. So instead of including that $220,000 for pruning in the draft budget, what we've done is we've said we have our standard $80,000 that we always do. On top of that, let's plan on an extra $80,000 just for this 1 year right now. Once we do the tree inventory, that'll help us to be able to come up with a plan. And so at committee meetings and internally with staff, during this budget year, in preparation for next budget year, let's come up with a couple of different options in terms of how are we going to do this tree pruning and what are some really plans that we can take. And frankly, I mean, I think really going from $80,000 to $220,000 would be a big increase, but maybe there's some way to wean into it and we can kind of explore some different options when we've got a little bit more time to look for it. So we'll take money out of our reserves this year to cover it, but be looking for a plan for next year to be able to get it into the operating budget in some form. And then we're looking at something similar in terms of tree plantings. And so we've got about $34,000 worth of tree planting requests that came in, and kind of the ideal or the hope would be to do that each year. But what we're saying right now is we're going to give it out of our reserves, because as we noted, we've got a large amount of reserves, and that's where we really have the funds to be able to do things. And so we're saying this year, yes, we can plant extra trees, but we are not committing to it for, you know, every year going forward for the future. We'll see how our reserves are each year and kind of see what we do with that. I will add as a caveat to that, what we're really saying is we're planning on having some carryovers because of the way that tree planting season works. With our budget year ending in April, we have trees that we have to order and they have to start growing for us around January or February. We don't actually get them until April or May. And so if we don't get them until May, technically their expenditures will come out of next fiscal year. But we can't wait until we go to April and approve the budget to say, yes, get the trees in May that you had to start growing in January, because time travel isn't real. And so what we do is we commit right now for the following year. So what we're committing right now for our spring planting is we're saying, here's what we're going to do in spring of 2022. And so we know it'll be a carryover to get in next year's budget for that. So that's kind of what we're doing with the tree portion.
And that's a, I'll say that's a direct request. I'm sure, I'm familiar with that, is to getting the tree maintenance
Yeah.
program on a cycle so that you can plan better and count on it,
Yep.
rather than fall behind and have a problem. It's like jetting
Yep.
for trees, So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep. So it's definitely something we want to work on and come up with a good cycling program. All right, the next page just talks about debt service funds, which we've already talked about. Welcome to peruse that if you'd like to. We've already kind of covered that in general. And then the next several pages just lists, it's kind of a long list of all the different projects. So I mentioned the items that we had, if the grand total was less than 100,000, we just broke them as 100,000. If there were a lot of similar things like alleys, we just kind of lumped them together as here's an alleys cost. These next 3 pages just list out all the different projects that are going on. So part of that is sort of, just so you're aware of the projects that are out there. you'll notice we've got several gateway signs kind of about maybe a third of the way down the first page. Again, all under 100,000, so they were all sort of lumped together on the earlier pages. So it's a lot more detail and largely for your information, both to know what kind of things are on the horizon, but also to have an idea of the vast number of different projects that are all kind of working on at once. And so that's sort of a reason why some projects don't move forward as quickly, because there's so many of them that we're kind of trying to do all at once. So that's those next 3 pages. And so now we get on to kind of some of the key questions that we'd like to try to get check on and some resolution on. But before we do that, any questions about any other parts of the budget up till now?
Can you tell me the Liberty Park water main, is that engineering?
Yes.
It is, yeah.
Yep, that's, yep, just the design, not actually building it.
Okay.
All right, then I will briefly go talk through a couple of these different key questions that we're looking for some feedback on, and then we can kind of have a discussion about them. So, as I mentioned in my initial email and in the document here, kind of walks through this. Cannabis tax is something that we haven't ever had. This is a brand new tax for us. We just have a place that just opened. And historically, what we've typically done with the village is, you know, kind of as I mentioned at the Admin Finance Committee, our goal is always to underestimate revenues. And so what we usually do is we wait till we see how much revenue we get before we put it into the budget. So it's always extra money, and then we say, okay, great, we'll use it for something in the future. But this year, we've decided it would make sense to include some kind of conservative estimate. As noted, we've got pretty hefty reserves, and so, you know, not doing ongoing services to our residents, not taking care of the needs of the village might not be best served by that. And so we've come up with at least an initial estimate of putting in $200,420 in the budget for what we think we may receive from it. In the past, we kind of looked at a medium-low estimate and a medium-high estimate to be between $217,000 to $333,000 just for the cannabis tax. And then, you know, still being conservative, we have not put anything in the regular sales tax or the stormwater sales tax, any extra money for that. So that's kind of the question is, do we want to do that, you know, assume we're going to get that $200,000? If not, there's some things we may want to look at cutting, and we put together the list of all the requests for of non-personnel items, and that's included in your packet as well. And so you can see here kind of what was requested and what was reduced. So I'm kind of interested in people's thoughts of, do we want to go with that amount for the cannabis tax, or do we want to, you know, be even more conservative and not include anything for it? What are...
But the cannabis tax you're showing is not going to go for personnel. It'd just be project if we include it in the budget.
Yeah, I mean, it's for the general operating costs. So it's, I mean, everything in the general fund is all kind of mixed in together. So, I mean, there's personnel costs, there's project costs, it's sort of everything mixed together.
Yeah, but
Just general fund.
Yeah, but probably most of this will go towards putting it back in the community on projects.
I mean, everything will go towards, helping towards the community and those kind of things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just like gaming tax helped us to maintain our services.
sure. Yep.
Yeah, I guess I don't have any issue with.
Hey, Mayor?
Whoop.
Go ahead. Hey, I don't know who's talking.
Trustee Nero.
Trustee Nero.
This is Steve. Yes, sir. Sorry. This reminds me of the video gaming tax. When we enacted that, there was a lot of uncertainty or unknown around the revenue side. And I think, Spencer, correct me if I'm wrong, but we were extremely conservative, but still put something in. I think that's the right thing to do. I mean, we can look at local examples just with surrounding communities and the type of revenue they have. So we know it's going to be something. I'd hate to pull things off just for the sake of the unknown. We know it's going to be something. So I would support being extremely conservative, but I think we should still count something, I guess.
Yeah, and I agree with Trustee Nero in that we know it's gonna bring some revenue in, so let's just make a, you know, pick a figure.
I agree
and
with
plug it
that as well. Yeah.
So you got your answer for one
Okay.
question.
Yep, I think we've got answer to that one. Okay. Excellent. The next one I wanted to talk about are water rates. And so you'll recall, just pass all those. So I've got our water fund. So brief overview of the water fund. We kind of looked at the other funds. I wanted to save the water until we're talking about this whole topic. So we break up the water into two different categories, water operating and water infrastructure. And this is something that started several years ago after Director Ramsey put together a study about the infrastructure needs of the community, and we set up a plan for funding those infrastructure needs by increasing water rates and kind of continuing to increase them. We had talked about how we went a long time without having any increases, and then suddenly we needed to increase a lot, but it didn't make sense to do one really big increase. Instead, it made sense to kind of do smaller increases over time to be able to meet our infrastructure needs. And so right now, looking just at the infrastructure piece of our water bill, we've got about 1.5 million in revenues this year, expected about 3.5 million in expenses, so it's about 200,000. Now, fortunately, on the operating side, we're kind of netting at $300,000, so we're really dipping into reserves about 1.7 million right now for that. So skipping back up to the last page of the slide presentation, which is page 41, I believe, you can see what the initial plan was going forward to kind of set this up. So we had a large increase in 2017, and then the plan was each of the next couple of years would be significantly lower increases. And then just, I think, about a year or two ago, we talked about, the importance of not getting to that point again. And so we just kind of figured what's the inflationary increase, and if we take CPI in terms of the general operating expenditures, what would that be? And so slight increases each year so that we don't continue to fall behind and don't get into a spot where we need to be doing, $1 per, 1,000 gallons in the future to kind of stay on top of things. So the plan initially would have been that in 2020, we would do a rate change, adding 40 cents to bring it up to $11.01 per 1,000 gallons, and that would generate about $285,000 worth of revenue, and then we would, each year do a little bit more. And so, but last year, amid the pandemic, as people were suffering from, loss of job and a lot of things going on in their lives, we felt like that was not the right time to increase the cost for residents. And so we said, all right, we're just going to miss out on that $285,000 for the first year. So now we're at the point where we need to kind of make a decision. What do we want to do this year? Do we want to, one option would be to say we're holding off and not doing anything again. One option would be to say, well, we really need to catch up, so we want to increase it by the 40 cents plus another 25 to do a 65-cent increase. Or kind of the middle of the road option would be to say, let's just have said we postponed everything by 1 year, and so we'll increase it by 40 cents this year, but we're not going to try to catch up to 25. We just know it'll take us another year before we hit our inflationary amount. So kind of interested in your thoughts, or there's, obviously any kind of increment in between those are things we could do as well. So kind of interested in people's ideas, thoughts.
I personally don't think we need to try to recoup it. So it's just an expense or revenue we didn't get because of the COVID-19 last year, so. What I do have to say with the water fund is that we've been really aggressive in replacing our water mains. And now the lead pipe, I know that we've done a good job of replacing. And the reason why is because the money's been in that fund. So we have, I think Mike Ramsey said that we're in pretty good shape with our water mains now, but there's still a couple left to do. Mm-hmm. So that's just my.
So you're saying we don't have to recoup it, but, so in my head, you're telling me that you're supportive of the increase because things go up, but we will be a year behind.
Yeah, I don't think we need to recoup
Yeah, I agree, Mayor. I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
And I was just
I
gonna,
do as well.
I
Trustee
think we
Brady.
should postpone it 1 year. It's, we just had an election, and if we increase this right now, I think it's kind of a negative thing towards the board. So I would postpone it
Another year?
Play by ear and see how our economy is going and take it from there.
I agree, given the fact that last meeting, we talked about how many residential customers were struggling. I think that in light of that, we can't go after another 40 cents. We had a huge number.
That's still the case? Are we seeing a lot of people not paying the bill still?
We did, besides not increasing the rate, we did suspend any water shut-off application at all. But there are, that might be hard to quantify, and, you know, Spencer might be looking it up, but there are, when you have an announced program that you're not going to charge light fees and you're not going to do water turnoffs, there are people that will, it's zero interest, so they'll, you know, why not pay the bill? So the numbers might be higher, but I don't know if it's out of, you know, necessity. But if we were doing water shutoffs, are we at a higher quantity than before? Or if Mike's on, you know, does he know?
What's the
I'm
total
pulling it
dollar
up
figure?
right now? So the total amount that we had talked about in the past is we have grand total between residents and businesses, about 400 people that are at the point where if we were doing shut-offs, they would be shut off, and they owe a total of about $131,000 that they'd need to pay to prevent themselves from being shut off. So we had talked at the last meeting about, for the 60 businesses that we have going and shutting, you know, starting our shut-offs again for businesses, but holding off on the residential until we get a good handle on the new program that, you know, the money that the federal government included in the last plan to be able to allow municipalities to help provide that benefit. So that was kind of the discussion is, you know, if there's $100,000 that residents owe and there's 340 residents that would be getting shut off, that might be something to look at. And so maybe one thing we could do is wait till we see the details of that program. That might be an option.
What's weighing on me, though, is, you know, not having them pay for the water is, you know, a nice thing. However, we have, as a municipality, we have to pay for it. The bill doesn't go away.
That's a good point.
And that whatever it was, 1.7, whatever in lost revenue comes out of something else we're trying to do. So we still have to pay.
Yes,
We still have to buy it.
The costs of.
We're also looking at the CBD income, tax income.
Yeah.
And we're also looking at
North Water Tower.
that one. And I just feel that 40 cents more on these people that are close to being shut off. You know, that's 400 residents in town. I feel that that's excessive. And I'm not saying that we don't go after them ultimately. Maybe we
Yeah.
put them,
Well,
you know,
and
get to
I'm
the-
not talking about those people, I'm talking about if you have the ability to pay for the increased cost, then there's, you know, there's a lot of people out there that can afford to pay their water bill.
And I think it all has to do with the wording of the billing that goes out. I think that we can be a little more aggressive with that possibly, but like we talked about at the last meeting, let's hold out and see what happens with the feds.
Steve, I know we're not counting on the 3 million plus that the federal government's gonna pass down to local communities. And there's some strings attached as far as spending, but that definitely could cover another postponed year. I mean, we're
Yeah, that's a good point. So one of the things that, you know, I don't think there's a lot of details yet on exactly what you can use the money for, but one of the things that is listed is, in theory, what they're, you know, saying is it might include needed water infrastructure. And so that may be a way to help offset it depending on what those rules are. So maybe it, you know, maybe it makes sense to wait, you know, not do any increase right now and wait and see, you know, what that program from the federal government's like and then what the assistance program from the federal government's like. Maybe that's an option. Maybe we keep it in the budget so we, you know, can do it if we need to, but we don't actually make the rate increase until we get a little more information on some of these other programs.
yeah.
That's an option.
And again, we're not counting it in the budget until we know for sure we're getting it, so.
Right.
Trustee Barry's.
I apologize. I agree with Trustee Little and Trustee Brady's sentiments, and regardless of the federal money, I really feel that, we're not out of this yet. As, Manager May's been reporting, 8% we're back up to. So to kind of say we're out of the woods and just put this increase back on people that are struggling, I agree with Trustee Little. That's a high amount for a town of 25,000, and also agree with Manager May that some people may be taking advantage of that, but I know a lot of people, a lot of friends, a lot of friends are hurting and so forth in town. So and what Spencer has previously told us, we're in good shape. So I would really agree with kicking that can down the road a little bit.
I'm okay with it.
And Mayor, if it's that big of it, I guess I wasn't expecting it to be that impactful still. But if it is still an issue, I'm fine waiting as well. I just, I think it's safe to say that, and maybe it's just an industry thing, but the infrastructure isn't going to get cheaper. And, if we do postpone it, I think we need to be clear to the public that, this is just a result of COVID, and we understand that folks are still hurting. But at some point, there's going to have to be increases. And although none of us like them, the cost of getting that drinking water is not cheap. And, you'd hate to see a big jump in a few years because we're forced to, because we need to make a big investment or something happens. So I think we've done a really good job the past 5-7 years on keeping up with it. And I just think it's important that the public knows what we're doing is kind of a one-time thing, and the level of importance that the drinking water is. I mean, it's just not cheap.
That's a good point, and it's worth explaining to anybody, listening about it too, but yes, we have a water utility, and it's a separate enterprise fund as described earlier. We operate the utility uniquely, but the actual potable drinking water we purchase through the DuPage Water Commission from the city of Chicago. So it's Lake Michigan water that is here. So there's the cost for the product, and then there's the cost for the distribution system, which is our water main network and our water plant and the testing and water quality aspects of it as well. So the costs are in two different places to operate the utility.
And the history was that we were a little bit underselling it. Then the price went way up, and we identified that, and then we had to whack everybody with a bigger bill.
I'm not disagreeing with anything that was said, but even though we're not affecting the rate, there are still costs that are by others on us that we agreed a long time ago to pass those through. So our water billing system is designed to do that. So the increment we're talking about is our infrastructure piece of it.
But if we
I like Trustee Little's sentiments about, let's what this cannabis sale does. Instead of just putting it on the people and spending that cannabis, sales tax revenue for fluffer stuff, we can maybe save our residents. So I think that's a good, valid point. We have one store opening, there may be others. Let's see what 1 year does of that, and maybe that, I think our residents always appreciate when we look out for them that way.
And I actually have a quick question. Do we know traditionally, when do we find out if they're going to raise the water rates on us?
It's traditionally May 1st. The city of Chicago usually gives a proposal to the Beach Water Commission. They evaluate it. They have a commission that looks into it, and every year then usually May 1st is when we know how much they're going to increase it by.
Okay. Yeah, and looking at it as a whole, yes, I agree that let's hold off then. But I think we also are going to need to revisit it too once we know what the rates are going to be. And but yeah, I'm in favor of that as well.
Hey, Mike or Spencer, what is the current rate that we get charged for the water, that the village gets charged?
I will pull that up real quick.
With the possibility of this money coming to us, we definitely don't need this 285. We could use that to do something in the budget already that's infrastructure and offset this. So I'm agreeing with everybody who will have the money, and the residents, give them a break.
How fast will home rule kick in?
Hey, Mayor, while they're looking that up, I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
Couldn't we always come back, let's say we find out the rules with the 3 million and we find out where we can and can't spend it? I mean, we could always come back and give a permit holiday and try to help the neighbors in those regards too, if we decided. I mean, that's a big windfall of revenue. So I'm just kind of excited to see how we can spend it, but we could always come back and tweak things even after the budget is passed, correct?
Oh, yeah, I think that's probably a priority for the board to look at, looking back on the things we listed as important and see what we want to do. You know, you could do another $750,000 worth of sidewalks or something like that the residents really benefit from, or more roads but we want to make sure we get it before we spend it.
Just gonna answer the comment while he's looking. The understanding is as soon as you cross 25,000 in population, you're automatically home rule. I don't know if there's some declaration or something we have to submit, or if it's just already built into the statute, but it's relatively quickly. It's the it's a function of, the census processing has been pushed off because of COVID and two different administrations handling the census differently. We should have had the information by now. So we're, eagerly waiting when that would be. Don't have any idea when we'll know what that number is. So we can't count on the data when we can access that. But it's not just being home rule, but just having the better population number. There are other revenues that are population-based, the LGD, the local government distributive fund from the state of Illinois, motor fuel taxes that we collect are population-based. So just the increased number in population is a help, whether it's home rule or not.
I have that number for the Water Commission. We pay $4.97 per 1,000 gallons.
It's almost
So $5 per 1,000 in our rates.
That's not with the increase that probably May 1st will bring, right, Mike?
Yeah, that rate is only good through April. That rate's good through April 30th of 2021, and right now they already are reevaluating. They'll let us know pretty soon.
What have they been kind of raising it every year? Do you know offhand, rough?
Lately, it's been really low, like 3 to 5 cents. But I've heard rumblings that City of Chicago is looking to try to increase it even more. But it's not a huge increase.
City of Chicago has a captured water customer base and they also have a large, to their defense, they also have a large problem with their own system, whether it's lead services or, just their own infrastructure needs as well. So they're certainly eyeing their value of the product that they're selling to us.
But 40% of our rate is going to
Product.
pay for the water.
Yep.
Roughly 40,
Yeah.
45%. Okay.
Right, so it sounds like, I think what I'm hearing, the general consensus is we don't want to do any kind of rate increase right now in May. We'll probably come look at it again, especially, once we find out more information about either of these two federal programs. But even at that point, we may not be interested in doing the rate. But obviously, once we have more information, we'll present that information to the board and see what things happen. But we shouldn't be planning on or expecting that kind of an increase this year.
Do you leave it in the budget in that case? Just don't implement it?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
And that really was kind of the main points I wanted to make sure we touched on. Any other questions, thoughts, other things we want to consider?
I've got one more point here and a note. I was going through the pages of material here, and I'm just wondering, knowing that revenue is better than expected, and I know that the service organizations, the Lions and the Rotary, weren't able to do what they needed to do. The money is spent locally here, and I'm wondering if we can go back to them, instead of doing let's look at this every year. Is there any reason that it doesn't have to be, can it be every 6 months or whatever? Because we are still in this situation. Is there funds available in the new budget where we can get them on the front end to give them a leg up on what they got? Their year is gonna be half over, and they're still gonna have their hands tied behind their back. And I'm just wondering if there's any more we can do there.
We're gonna start the grant program up again this year?
Yep, so the plan is to do the
I
grant
know it's
program
in there,
up
it's just
again.
how do we make that happen, so.
But yeah, I mean, so we could do the same kind of thing we did previously. We could, pass another grant program for this year that just gives grants to to entities that have done community events in the past, rather than waiting to see if they can do community events this year. We can just kind of say, look, like we did last time, you did in the past, here's the application, apply for this grant, regardless of whether or not you, do a community event, you have this grant, and then maybe we can look at, only giving them for community events in the following years or something. That's possible, sure.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and it's just, if the board's up for that, I think it's a great way to use some of the funds that we have.
Goes right back in town.
Goes right back into town.
Any other Spencer questions? Again, well done. I know you've been meeting with staff for quite a while now to get this to the point it is, but, and they'll probably have some changes even before we see it next week. Again,
Yep, potentially. We're always fine tuning.
so.
Yep.
Anybody, question? Well then, tonight, there will not be an executive session. If we need one, it may be next week. We'll wait till then. At this point, if there's no other business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, Little?
Second, Barker?
Motion's been made and second to adjourn. I'd ask for a roll call, please.
Trustee Barker,
Yes.
Trustee Brady,
Yes.
Trustee Guzzo,
Yes.
Trustee Nero,
Yes.
Trustee Barry. Trustee Barry,
He already adjourned. He's remotely.
Linda Little, Trustee
Yes.
Little.
Again, I want to thank everyone for participating in our budget workshop, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.